The Canadian Premier League kicks off in less than a week, so today we are going to take a look at the biggest storylines surrounding each CPL club leading into the 2024 season. We will be going coast to coast and starting out west with Pacific, where there's only really one place to start, Alex, and that's the fact that they will be going into this season without Amir Didic and Manny Aparicio, two of their best players over the past few seasons. Do you think they'll be able to cope?
That's a very, very tough question. It's one that's going to define their offseason, and it's tough. I don't think there's been a team across the league that have lost two more crucial players to their team, to how they play. Manny Aparicio is the heartbeat. Since he signed, he's been the MVP. They've had some great players around him over that span. Alejandro Diaz was a machine for them. Marco Bustos was a big piece. Lucas McNaughton, Callum Irving. Yet throughout all that, as those guys have departed, it's always been Manny Aparicio, just the heartbeat of that team. Whenever he's played, he's been a rock. And Amir Didic has really grown into this Pacific side as well, as ever since he joined from FC Edmonton. That's two key pieces that are going to hurt their attack, but also defensively with Didic gone, and Aparicio also covers a lot of ground there. So yeah, it's a lot to ask, because no matter who you bring in, those shoes are so big. Those are two team of the season level, MVP level. Aparicio has been in that discussion, right? And Didic has definitely been in that team of the season discussion. How do you replace two guys like that? Pacific definitely are banking on more younger players. It's a bit more of a rebuilt squad, one that brought in some new faces. Who knows? Maybe in a couple years, some of these guys can step up. They have some fun names like Paul Amadume, who we've seen glimpses of. There's a lot of interesting guys in that midfield, like a Stephen Yates, who showed some glimpses. Sean Young, of course, we know can really take another big step up, but will that be enough to replace two stars leaving?
One player that Pacific brought in that I think will be under the radar will be Christian Greco-Taylor. Some Canadians might have been familiar with him watching him play for the U20s, where I thought he had an excellent tournament. He's going to be probably their starting left back. We saw him have the ability to kind of tuck into a back three at times. He's got an unbelievable left foot as well. How dangerous do you think he could be?
Yeah, he's definitely a young player to watch. He's got a lot of upside. He's already got pro reps, having played in MLS Next Pro with the Whitecaps. I think he's someone that they'll look to step up and give them that depth at wing back, and maybe that gives them something a bit different tactically, like you mentioned, freeing up a Dada Luke or a George Makumbo on the other side to play a bit more free. So I think Greco-Taylor could be an interesting one. For me, I'm watching any of their midfielders. I mentioned Sean Young. Can he take another step forward? But I'd look at two of the new guys. One's new-ish, Zachary Bahous. He signed at the end of last year's run towards the playoffs. He didn't really get a play in the midfield because they're so stacked. With Aparicio gone, maybe he can fill some of those shoes. Or I'd look at one of the new guys, Andrei Tircovinu, comes from a good level in Romania. If he can replace some of Aparicio's intangibles and his offensive skill, maybe they end up replacing him by committee between the likes of Bahous, Tircovinu, and Sean Young, which isn't the worst idea, because the one area where they do remain in good position heading into this year is up front, right? They kept Saluf, Josh Hurd's back, Adonijah Reed's back. They signed Rion Moore, Trinidad and Tobago International. They signed Dario Zanata, an experienced Canadian striker. They get them the ball, they'll score goals. But that question is, with that Aparicio gone, will they do it?
Staying in the West Coast, we are going to take a look at Vancouver FC. I think the biggest question mark around this team is, how soon is too soon for this rebuild? Did they do enough to compete? And Alex, I want to focus in on kind of the goal here of the club, because we saw them bringing a ton of BC talent, which I love. We recently interviewed Ben Fisk, who talked about returning home and returning with a bunch of other guys who are really excited to play in front of friends, family, a lot of talented players. David Norman Jr., I'm excited to see after his recent experience in Europe, Paris G as well, plus several others. Is this team the real deal?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see in action, because, look, I think they've done a lot of great off the field. You can commend them, right? They've got two great kits, including the one that's behind me there. So they're going to look great in that regard. They've signed a lot of BC talent, which is a great way to endear yourself to the local fan base. They could essentially throw out a BC lineup if they want on some days, which is special. Maybe something they'll do on like BC Day in the summer. That's great from the community initiative. They'll help them continue to grow as a club, but what we'll have to see is what it looks like on the pitch. On paper, this team looks like it can be a contender. I think you look at some of the pieces they have. Irving in goal is someone who can really be one of the best goalkeepers in this league. You got, solid pieces at the back in Rocco Romeo, David Norman Jr., You move up to the midfield. I liked Vasco Fry last year. You've had Caden Chung and Paris G at fullback. Guys like Ben Fisk is a veteran winger. He can bring a lot. Alejandro Diaz, Gabriel Batar is an early MVP favorite for me. The question is, we just haven't seen much precedent for brand new teams competing this early in their life cycle. Forge and Cavalry did it in year one. They already were established. Bobby Smyrniotis and Tommy Wilton Jr., they already had the Foothills and Sigma experience. It wasn't a true year one team. Pacific, who competed in 2021, won the title. That was kind of year three of their project, which included bringing Pamadou Khan in year two, bringing in a lot of players to support like Aparicio and Bustos. That's a year three thing. Ottawa, they founded in 2020. There was 2 pretty rough years, and then in third year, 2022, everything came together under Carlos Gonzalez and all these signings. Last year, Halifax, year 5, they really had their best year yet. Took them finding the right coach, and Patrice guys are a rebuilt team. There just basically hasn't been much present for a team in year 2 competing at the level that they have, unless it's been a Forge and a Cavalry who've had that past experience. So curious to see if this Eagles team, with these signings they've made, especially that there's a good mix of veterans signings, but also young guys with upside. All I'll say is everyone who's seen Grady McDonald play or has talked to the kid says that this kid will be the real deal. They've got some youngsters like that already, James Cameron, TJ Taheed. The question is, will that be enough to kind of beat the curve that it seems to take for a rebuild?
And don't forget about Dyer. I think him coming back, maybe he'll play in that 10, maybe out wide. I think he could be a big player, and it's going to be exciting to see how this team does.
Yeah, and funny enough, you forgot a player in Mickey Cantav, who Magic Mickey,
yes.
Magic Mickey, as they called him, when he was on, it felt like their offense hit another level. So between those 4, there's goals there.
Cavalry FC is up next, and you know what question I'm going to ask. Can they finally get over the hump in an incredible match? I really enjoyed watching it live, but they added a lot of depth, and I think that will be a big part of it, but I really want to focus on Diego Gutierrez. He was sensational for a very poor Valour side, so I'm curious to see what you think about him adapting into this lineup, and is he the piece they need?
Yeah, it feels like he's a great piece to bring in to support an already strong midfield, an already strong team. And that's what's exciting about this Cavalry team, is that they're essentially running back the team that won the regular season in such dominant fashion. They locked it up with a couple games to go. They were cruising, winning games for fun at points in the summer. It felt like they were never going to lose. And they've kept all the key pieces, right? Like an Ali Musi, who was a league MVP level player, and Klomp, who as well was, as we saw, ended up being a league MVP level player. You keep a Marco Carducci. Like, all the core pieces are there, and that's huge, right? And then you got guys like Eric Cobb who are primed for growth. But then I love that to support that, they've brought in a Diego Gutierrez, someone who at times for Valour last year was playing at a team of the season level. He's one of the best midfielders in the league. The way he plays, he's just someone who's attracted to the ball. He really likes to control the tempo. That fits really well into this Cavalry ethos. So yeah, I'm excited for this Cavalry team. Yeah, they lost some guys that will help other teams. Like Alar Khan is a great signing for Valour. Ben Fisk will be a great signing for Vancouver. But for the most part, other than those 2, they lost guys that they hardly ended up using over the course of the year, and they've only added quality, right? Like Warshewski, that's another great signing. Malcolm Shaw, someone who's done a lot of damage with Ottawa. And those are depth pieces for them. They're not asking them to start. That's scary, because it shows they already have that nucleus in place. And then they add in a Lucas Diaz, who has the room to just quietly break out alongside a Mile Henry as potential U21 candidates. This Cavalry team feels like they have enough juice to compete for a double. So now we'll see if they're able to finally get it over the line, because that's really the only question that's ever dogged this Cavalry team. They've now got 2 regular season titles, 1 official, 1 of course unofficial from year 1. But it's those darn playoffs. They can never get over the hump in the playoffs. Can they do it this year? They've got the juice to do so. There's certainly no excuse.
And I think you touched on the most important factor with this squad is I think that they added depth. They didn't lose any massive pieces. They still have their MVP level players, but then bringing on players with growth, like you said, Lucas Diaz, I think could quietly have a breakout season. We talked with him, Alex. We see how hungry he is to come over here and make a difference, plus just some other talent. Malcolm Shaw may not be the biggest name you're going to bring in, but late in a game, late in playoffs, someone to come off the bench with some quality. He's an important piece, and I'm excited to see what this side can do. Valour FC, I think, had an interesting offseason. The biggest question mark is, can they end that playoff drought and qualify for the playoffs for the very first time? The one player I am excited that joined this side, Alex, is one that you and I talked about a lot. It's Sean Hundle, mainly because we saw him have a pretty bright start to Vancouver FC, and then Diaz came in and it just kind of ruined his flow. They pushed him out wide. They kind of played him as a 9 with Diaz as a 10. They didn't use him properly, and we were talking about a Valour side who well coached, had some really good moments last season, but did not have a striker. So I want to focus on Hundle because that's the good news, although I know that you're going to get into it because they lost some massive players this season as well.
That's the story of Valor's offseason. They lost and they gained. And, the question is, will what they brought in be enough to overcome that? And that's something we're at the moment on paper. That's a tough ask for some of these guys because they lost Ryan Yesley, who was, for my money, at least, especially the first half of the year, goalkeeper of the year. Kind of fell off at the end of the year, but probably facing so many shots every week as he did maybe contributed to that. Then you had Diego Gutierrez, who we mentioned, and then Mateo De Brienne, who ends up being the U21 player of the year. Those are three guys that are not easy to replace. Even on top of that, they lost some other guys like a Pacifique Nyongabire. Inconsistent, but still showed some good things. They lost some key pieces at the back. Walter Ponce seemed like the most consistent of their striking options. He's gone. It's going to be interesting to see how this team fares because their strategy has been to get a lot of CPL experience. That could help them because at times Valor lacked some of that experience. I think that'll really help, especially with the way Phil Dos Santos plays. He wants his teams organized, disciplined, and I think a lot of these guys will help them do that. But the question will be, is there enough juice, especially up front with the Hundal? He showed he can score on a Vancouver team when he had no one around him. Before Batar was up to form, when Cantave wasn't even there, Diaz wasn't there, Hundal was scoring. So I think he can score. That's an encouraging signing, but we'll have to see what the rest of the team around him can do because they brought in guys like Noah Verhoeven, who kind of got lost in the shuffle at Ottawa. Can he thrive back in the starting role? Roberto Alarcon get healthy again because I thought he was really good for Cavalry when healthy. Can Tass Mordekudis, to show that, okay, maybe York, I was a bit wrong to focus on some other center backs other than him. Can Mordekudis step up? But they're asking a lot of guys who are coming from other clubs. Not saying they're bench players at other clubs, but they're coming from other clubs where they were felt surplus to requirements. Maybe that's the secret, though, for Valor. Maybe they kind of take that hunger of, look, you weren't wanted at these clubs, or you weren't seen as first choice, come here, let's gel, find a hardworking identity under Dos Santos and surprise some teams. And I think that's where Valor's really going to have to thrive because I look at some of the heartbeat of that team, like guys like Dante Campbell and Rafael Ohin. Those guys are workhorses. They're guys that are going to want to work hard. And I think that's maybe an identity that can help Valor be frustrating and surprise teams.
It's unfortunate that's just a situation right now at Valor. It was more than likely it was always going to be this type of off season, but I think no matter what, Dos Santos is a good enough coach to be able to get this team to buy in, play his tactics. It'll be defensive. It'll be stubborn, but they have a little bit of quality going forward now. So it'll be interesting to see if someone, like we said, Sean Hundle can step up. Maybe Williams can have a big season as well and hopefully score some goals because if they can still be solid at the back, plug it down in the midfield. I know without Gutierrez, it might be a little bit harder to do, but you mentioned Campbell could be in for a big season and then score some goals up front. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to make the playoffs. Onto the East Coast we go, and we will begin with the defending champions, Forge FC. Now, the big question mark for them will simply, can they do it again? And I think a lot will think yes, because why would you doubt this side? But I think it's worth noting that this is one of their most difficult off seasons in terms of departures. They've lost some massive names. Sissoko was a big one, Rama, James, Pasillas, and even Tavernier could be on his way out. There's been reports that he's on trial right now with AS Monaco and Impressing. So he was potentially going to be a breakout star for them. He could still be, but if they lose a player like him with such an exciting talent, it's a very difficult offseason. But I mean, it's never really stopped Forge before, has it?
No, and that's the thing. You can really never count out a Bobby Smirnotis coach team. He's going to, work his magic with some youngsters who can step up, but it's a big ask for any of these players because Wubens Pasillas, he's probably one of the best number 9s in CPL history. He could score goals. He could score them with his right, his left. That's a huge loss. Magikarp James, only 1 year in the CPL. But man, he was a team of the season level player at center back last year. He was just a rock. Held them in so many games with his ability to defend. Art Rama, someone who maybe a bit more under the radar on this Forge team, but he just, ever since he's come in, he's just been such a perfect player with his tenacity, his ability to go forward, everything. He could just do everything at that fullback position. And then Sissoko, I mean, on Forge, he was a bit of a rotation piece because that's just more of a credit to Becker and Hojabapur and everyone around him. But that's someone who's a starting level midfielder on every CPL team. And that's why it's scary to think that he swapped teams for someone else in Ontario. But those are 4 big losses. There are guys who can step up. For example, for Sissoko, they've got Kadeem Kane. The depth they have up front, you lose Pasillas, okay, just Taryn Campbell step up, all-time leading scorer in CPL. Like, they should be fine at the 9, but I think really the big question is at the back. Can they replace James, because it's been a few years of key acquisitions too, right? Losing Daniel Crutzen was a big one. Will Achinati Janssen have to play at center back? He can, but that's always going to be something that you lose a bit in midfield when you do that. So yeah, I think these losses, especially James, are going to be ones that are really going to pose problems for Smirniotis. But I think if there's one guy, if you want to deal with those problems, he's someone who's proven very good at finding solutions. And who knows, maybe there's a youngster we're not talking about that will Smirniotis can work some magic on, and that will surprise and impress this year.
Achinati Janssen will probably step into the back with Matusala because of the signing of Cisse returning. I think he will go into the midfield. And then, like you mentioned, Alex, there are some other youngsters too, where if Bobby can get his hands on them and give them an opportunity, Malcolm Duncan could step up. We have Kwesi Poku, who could be in for, I think, a big season, especially if Tavernier doesn't return. You have Noah Jensen as well, and even like a Jordan Hamilton. I mean, we've been expecting with him, but with Campbell as well as Bacias, he's never really got that opportunity. So there's still a lot of talent in this side. It would surprise no one to see them do well and go on and win their 5th out of 6 years.
Any team with Kyle Becker and Tristan Borges and Achinati Janssen, they're going to have a chance to win.
York United is up next, and this is a team I'm very excited to talk about. I know last year, Alex, when we did this, I hyped them up. Now, they did make the playoffs, but wasn't the exact way I thought the season was going to go for them. But I think there's even more expectations this season. I think they did a lot of incredible work this offseason. There's a lot of players I want to focus on. Frank Stirring is a big signing. Juan Cordova, who I watched train about a month ago, he looked really, really good. They have a ton of talent. Noah Botnay's had a really good offseason as well. I've heard really good things about him. This team is exciting, but it is a lot of new pieces. I didn't even mention some of the Mexican players who came in as well. So is it too much too soon to have all these pieces and hope that they can find a way to be the real deal and not so streaky like they've been the past few seasons?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how this York team comes together, because I think there's a lot of good pieces, right? Like you mentioned, like a back two of Frank Stirring and Noah Botnay is going to be exciting. They got guys returning like Max Ferrari can take another step forward, and he was very good last year when healthy. You got look in that midfield between the likes of Sumaro, Adekugbi, Baldissimo. There's depth there. Babuli on his day can be the best 10 in this league. I like the overall look of this lineup. The only problem is over the last 2 to 3 years, they've been very average. Not in a bad way. Not all average teams are created equal. There's average where you're just very mediocre. Every week it's just you float along. York's been more of the roller coaster team where on their day, they've been one of the best teams in the league. They showed it last year. Remember that few weeks where they won like 4 in a row and were at the top of the table fighting with Pacific? But then they also would have runs where they'd lose 4 in a row. And that's the more frustrating kind of average, because you show hints of what you could be. You show that, on the day when everyone's clicking, everything's going right, this York team can be very fun, very exciting. But then you flip it and show, on the other side, there's a lot of growth. So I think that's going to be the big thing I want to see out of Martin Nash as head coach and the rest of this team, is get them consistent. Maybe it doesn't have to be top team in the league every week, but if you can at least show that you can be a playoff level team every week and push and grow, I think that's exciting. I think the one thing is they've got the players to do it, but they do have one big question for me, and that's what's to do up front. Losing Ozaze Di Rosario. All the other losses they sustain, they can overcome, like a Murtakudis, a Giant Sopolis, etc. With Ozaze Di Rosario gone right now, they're asking Brian Wright to do a lot at the number 9. He's scored a fair amount of goals. He got hot and ended up with I think 3 or 4 last year. He had 7 the year before for Ottawa, but he was very streaky last year. With Di Rosario gone, there's a lot of pressure on Wright, and maybe that ends up making or breaking how consistent this team ends up being, because the easiest way to be consistent is to have guys who could pour in goals in the regular. If Wright isn't doing that, it's putting a lot of pressure on Babuli and all their wingers to help out in that regard.
This next team is Atlético Ottawa, and they are definitely the side that made the biggest splash this offseason. I mean, they already had a pretty talented roster, and then they added it with Yesley, Tabla, Aparicio, Didic, De Bruyne, Sissoko, just to name a few. There are more. How much pressure are this side under right now, Alex, to deliver with these big names? And what made Ottawa such an attractive destination? Is it just the relationship with Atletico Madrid?
I'm dizzy just from everything you've mentioned there, especially the signings. But I guess that's the potentially the Atletico Madrid effect playing in. We've seen it with Ollie Bassett coming in. He left Pacific. He went to Ottawa, became an MVP, got a trial opportunity down in Mexico at San Luis. We've seen Diego Espejo shine. He ended up trialing at Miami back last year. Seen some guys move around. Potentially, this is just the sign of the Ottawa effect coming together. And I think the nice thing with super teams from a player's perspective is that you get in an environment like this, people are going to be watching. They're You're going to see all these good, talented players. You've got multiple league MVP caliber players. You've got award winners across the board. People are going to watch, and this is going to be a chance to showcase themselves. So look, the expectation now heading into this year, fair, unfair, it feels like it's trophy or bust. Like if you finish this year without any sort of trophy, be it regular season or playoffs, it'll feel like disappointment. It feels like the expectation's the double, right? If there's going to be a first team to win the double, on paper, this Ottawa team looks capable to do it. And look, make some noise in the Canadian Championship. Those are a lot of guys that some have seen. Aparicio's been linked with MLS. Didic is, trialed in MLS. Sissoko, DeBriana's had rumors of MLS. Singh is in an MLS setup. Luke Singh, we can't forget. Ryan Yesley as well as had MLS interest. Maybe make some noise in the Canadian Championship. So yeah, this offseason has been stunning. Really, there's only two big questions, because on paper they've ticked off all the boxes, right? They've got scoring options. They've got guys in the midfield like Bassett and Aparicio. Really, my only, two questions are, can they keep everyone happy? Because there's going to be guys who are going to have to sit throughout all of that. And what will Carlos Gonzalez be able to do as a coach? Because we've seen a lot more defensive soccer from Ottawa, and that's done them well. They've been making the playoffs, and last year they came up short, but they were competitive right till the very end. Can he find a way to juice this lemon? Because there's a lot of options up front. If they can get the goals flowing, their defense is going to be fine with Didic, Singh, two goalies they have between Yesley and Ingham, and an embarrassment of riches. Can they get this offense clicking with all the pieces?
That's exactly where I was going to go, because on paper, it looks like this may be the most talented CPL roster we have ever seen. But we've seen, Real Madrid is a perfect example over the years of developing and grabbing and making these big signings, but not being able to make those pieces fit. There's no guarantee that they're going to be able to gel together like this. There's a lot of work that needs to be put in. A change of style, like you mentioned, could throw everything off. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but no matter what, you'd have to imagine with this type of talent and these players, they'll find a way to make it work. Ottawa will be a team to watch for sure this season. Finally, the last team we will take a look at is the HFX Wanderers. And Alex, my big question mark surrounding them is basically, was 2023 sustainable or an example of peaking too early? Last season, it just kind of seemed like all the pieces fell into place. They had a fantastic fan base. The crowd was incredible every single home match day. They had a great manager who got the pieces to work. A lot of big players stepped up, like Farron. Cavalry was probably my favorite player to watch last season. Nimick was incredible at the back. Everything just worked for them. Now, they didn't have the sexy signings like Atlético Ottawa did, but they did boost their team. Do you think this team can compete still at the top of the table, or will they regress a little bit?
Yeah, I think this Halifax Wanderer team is a contender. They should be a contender. Under Patrice Geyser, they grew so much. They had great underlying numbers too all season, which is always usually a good sign for if teams are primed for aggression, or if it's just an example of everything going right. But I'm more focused on the individual standpoint. It felt like everything Patrice Geyser touched turned to gold last year, right? It felt like every new signing, new player, he spent a lot of time talking about how they had a lot of new pros on their roster. Despite a slow start, which easily could have rattled them, like, oh, maybe we're not cut out to make this jump to the pro game. They just kept doing their thing. By the end of the year, they were one of the best teams to watch, and they finished third, which is a huge credit for everything they went through and some of the predictions that had them near the bottom of the table at the end of the year. My question is how the individuals react now in year two. Everything went perfect in year one. What if there's a slow start again? What if some adversity? How do they handle that? I find it interesting that they've signed a bunch of veterans. They went for, Christian Valesky, who's in his 30s, got a lot of USL experience. Someone like Jeremy Gagnon-Lapare, who's been in Halifax before, has CPL and other experience. Ryan Telfair's got experience all across North America and at the international level. I wonder if that's a sign from Patrice Geyser being like, okay, maybe we need those guys to bring that calm head of, look, maybe everything won't be perfect this year. Maybe everything will, but no matter what, you just got to stick to the plan under Patrice Geyser. I think if they do, this team can push for top two in the league, top one. They can push for that regular season title. They can push for the playoffs. Lorenzo Caligari last year was an MVP candidate. Dan Nimick, Massimo Ferrin. If those guys could take a step forward, it's going to be money. So for the Wanderers, really, my biggest question is how they handle adversity. Because other than that, everything looks great on paper for this team.
I think it's fair to say that this could be the most entertaining season yet we get in the Canadian Premier League. And I want to hear from you guys down in the comment section. So let me know, who do you think will win the North Star Cup this season? And as always, if you enjoyed this, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub. We'll see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.